Welcome to video lesson 25, Once Upon a Time. And I'm going to take up this poem, Once Upon a Time, which is your 25th lesson of secondary English subject. Learners, poetry is a form of literature that uses aesthetic and rhythmic qualities of language, such as sound symbolism and meter, to evoke feelings in addition to or in place of the prosaic ostensible meaning. Poetry uses forms and conventions to suggest differential interpretation to words or to evoke emotive responses. Devices such as assonance, alliteration, onomatopoeia, and rhythm are sometimes used to achieve musical or incantatory effects. The use of ambiguity, symbolism, irony, and other stylistic elements of poetic diction often leaves a poem open to multiple interpretations. Similarly, figures of speech used such as metaphor, simile, and metonymy create a resonance between otherwise disparate images, a layering of meanings, forming connections previously not perceived. Kindred forms of resonance may exist between individual verses in their patterns of rhythm and rhyme. Some poetry types are specific to particular cultures and genres and respond to characteristics of the language in which the poet writes. Readers accustomed to identifying poetry with Dante, Goethe, Maxwell, and Rumi may think of it as written in lines based on a rhyme and regular meter. There are, however, traditions such as biblical poetry that use other means to create rhythm on its own. Much modern poetry reflects a unique critique of poetic tradition, playing with and testing, among other things, the principle of euphony itself, sometimes altogether foregoing rhythm or set pattern or rhyme. In today's increasing globalized world, poets often adapt forms, styles, and techniques from diverse cultures and languages. Learners, here you have heard your grandmother or grandfather talking about how the world was very different when they were children. I am talking in the context of this present lesson, that is the poem Once Upon a Time. Have you heard them say that people had more time to talk to each other or meet each other in the golden days, or the olden days I would say, because the old days were gold? As children, we are innocent, loving, and honest about our feelings. But as time passes, many social and cultural factors and experiences change our personality and behavior. These experiences often take away some of our honesty and innocence. In the same way, the old way of life was innocent, like a child, because in those days, people were more honest and caring about each other than they were in the busy modern day world. When they meet people today, we often do not mean what we say. We only say nice things to them because we don't want to be rude. The poet wishes over here in this poem that the modern world would once again become innocent and childlike. He also wishes that he could once again be as natural, honest, and innocent as when he was a child. Learners, after completing this lesson, you will be able to recognize the value of being genuine in any relationship, compare changing behavior patterns with time, record actions that influence one. You'll be also able to know about implied comparison and satire. Learners, Once Upon a Time is a poem composed by Gabriel Okara. Gabriel Okara was born on 21st April 1921, Nigeria. He was a Nigerian poet and novelist whose verse had been translated into several languages by the early 1960s. A largely self-educated man, Okara became a book binder after leaving school and soon began writing plays and features for radio. In 1953, his poem, The Call of the River Nun, won an award at the Nigerian Festival of Arts. Some of his poems were published in the influential periodical Black Orpheus, and by 1960 he was a recognized poet and an accomplished literary craftsman. Okara's poetry is based on a series of contrasts in which symbols are neatly balanced against each other. They need to reconcile the extremes of experience, life and death are common themes, preoccupies his verse, and a typical poem has a circular movement from everyday reality to the moment of joy and back to reality again. Okara incorporated African thought, religion, folklore, and imagery into both his verse and prose. His first novel, The Voice, which came in 1964, is a remarkable linguistic experiment in which Okara translated directly from the Aija language, imposing Ijo syntax into English in order to give literary expression to African ideas and imagery. The novel creates a symbolic landscape in which the forces of traditional African culture and Western materialism contend. Its tragic hero, Okolo, is both an individual and a universal figure, and the ephemeral it that he is searching for could represent any number of transcendent moral values. Okara's skilled portrayal of the inner tensions of his hero distinguished him from many other Nigerian novelists. This poem, Once Upon a Time, composed by Gabriel Okara, is a comment on society through a monologue from a father to a son, which bemoans the loss of innocence in the transition from child to adult and a desire to revert back to that blissful childhood. The father addresses his son, telling him how he remembers that once people used to be open and expressive with their emotions, with laughter that reached their eyes, but now they are aloof and distant with fake smiles. Overt displays of emotions are considered to be suspicious and looked down upon. He reiterates that there was a time when relationships were based on mutual respect and cordiality. Now, however, people form friendships and relationships for personal benefits only. They form friendships and relationships for personal benefits, leading to a cold world without any depth of feeling. The father over here laments how hospitality has vanished as people only say the expected welcoming phrases without meaning them and shy away from allowing anyone from getting too close, distancing themselves whenever someone threatens to break down the walls they have hidden themselves behind. In the fourth stanza of the poem, the father admits to his son that he too has adapted and learned to live amidst false people. He had to fit in now, and now he too has the ability to put on various facades. He behaves exactly how he is supposed to in different scenarios with all their niceties which are necessary for each situation. Moreover, the father has learned to fake emotions and build relationships without any serenity or depth of feeling. He has learned how they say expected phrases without any meaning behind them and fake emotions. In the seventh stanza, learners, we find out that he does not want to be like this. He wants to revert back to the time when he was very childlike, like his son, when he was very innocent. He wants to forget all these stifling things, where things were so very open and new and very clear. And he wants to forget all those stifling things which were dampening his emotions and are slowly strangling life out of him. He is society and he cannot look himself in this eye without witnessing the same hypocrisy which he had been scathing earlier. So in the last stanza, the father pleads with the child to teach him how to express his emotions and return back to a time when he was young and carefree and naive and not aware of what apathy was required from him for him to survive. The poem consists of 7 stanzas with no definite rhyming scheme, which emphasizes the fact that there is a monologue, that it is a monologue from a father to his son. The tone throughout is nostalgic as the father remembers what things used to be like once when he was a child. There is an undertone of bitterness throughout the poem whenever the father talks about things that have changed and how the world has progressively become more and more decadent. Okara uses blunt expressions, blunt metaphors I would say, to describe how the ice block cold eyes of people now lack emotion, emphasizing the harsh intrusiveness of such eyes scrutinizing the poet, looking for the ways to exploit their relationship or their friendship. He has learned to pretend to feel whatever is expected of him at different events, using a smile to describe how he changes the masks to put on, like the dresses he is expected to wear on said events, each with their expected plethora of facial expressions and tones. He wears smiles like a portrait wears a smile, fixed and uncomfortable with no real meaning behind it. He detests looking at himself in the mirror for all he sees when he smiles in his teeth bared like a snake's fangs, revolting and dripping with poison. The repetition of the title, both at the beginning and the ending of the poem, suggests a sort of fairy tale-like tone to the poem, which resists the question of whether the past that the poet is remembering so fondly ever did exist, or if the time lost that he has so desperately wanting to return is just something that he has thought up in his mind as a defense mechanism that once upon a time things were really not at all bad, or not at all that bad. There is some very strong language used in the poem. The poet calls all the things that he has had to learn muting things that stifle the emotions inside of him, not allowing him to release. It seems to him that his voice has been taken and he is slowly being suffocated. He wants to forget all these things, to unlearn them and return back to a more innocent time. Once upon a time is a comment on the hypocritical society that we live in today, in which we are wary of emotion, distrustful of people, distrustful of affection, and guarded of laughter. Logical reasoning take precedence over emotions, and relationships are formed with prudent times in mind instead of affection and geniality. It is a false facade that everyone hides behind, and as a reason we are alone and isolated, despite being surrounded by people on all the sides. There is a price on relationships and an end date as soon as the purpose behind is over. There is no place nor desire for empathy in the world of today. The innocence of children is also a major theme in this poem, as it is this state that the poet wants to go back to. It is his childhood that he remembers throughout the poem, the time when things seem to be much more real and sincere. Or maybe it is only that the poet is remembering his childhood through the eyes of a child when he was too young to understand how people behave. Perhaps there was no such time when life was perfect. Perhaps it is only a misconception induced by nostalgia, but the poet doesn't care. All he wants is to go back when he could be free. Learners, let us now read the text and read the poem, I would say. Once upon a time, son, they used to laugh with their hearts and laugh with their eyes. But now they only laugh with their teeth. With their ice block cold eyes, search behind my shadow. There was a time indeed they used to shake hands with their hearts, but that's gone, son. Now they shake hands without hearts, while their left hands search my empty pockets. Feel at home, come again, they say, and when I come again and feel at home, once, twice, there'll be no thrice, for then I find doors shut on me. Now I have learned many things, son. I have learned to wear many faces like dresses, home face, office face, street face, host face, cocktail face, with all their conforming smiles like a fixed portrait smile. And I have learned too to laugh with only my teeth and shake hands without my heart. I have also learned to say goodbye when I mean good riddance, to say glad to meet you without being glad, and to say it's been nice talking to you after being bored. But believe me, son, I want to be what I used to be when I was like you. I want to unlearn all these mutings. I want to unlearn all these muting things. Most of all, I want to relearn how to laugh, for my laugh in the mirror shows only my teeth like a snake's bare fangs. Show me, son, how to laugh. Show me how I used to laugh and smile once upon a time when I was like you. I'll repeat the last line. Show me, son, how to laugh. Show me how I used to laugh and smile once upon a time when I was like you. Learners, just look into your part number 1, 25.2.1, stanzas 1, 2, 3, and you may read from the lines once upon a time to shut on me. Once upon a time, son, they used to laugh with their hearts and laugh with their eyes. But now they only laugh with their teeth, while their ice block cold eyes search behind my shadow. There was a time indeed they used to shake hands with their hearts, but that's gone, son. Now they shake hands without hearts, while their left hands search my empty pockets. Feel at home, come again, they say, and when I come again and feel at home, once, twice, there'll be no thrice, for then I find doors shut on me. Learners, the poet tells us his son about the behavior of people in the past and in the present and in the olden days and in the modern world. He remembers a time when people had true feelings for one another. They would laugh from the heart and meet one another with genuine feeling. But today in the modern busy world, people often greet each other without any warmth in their handshake. They greet each other with a smile or a laugh that doesn't reach their eyes or warm their hearts. When they say come again to a guest, they don't really mean it, and they only say it to be polite. According to the poet, people these days are often interested in meeting people only if they are rich, powerful, successful or famous, and they do not value or respect those who have no wealth or position. Learners, do you know that since times immemorial, Indians have been well known for their hospitality, the way in which guests are served and taken care of? Atithi Devo Bhav is an old slogan. What does it mean? In the olden days, when the means of communication were limited and slower than they are today, it was not possible to be prepared for the arrival of a guest. The word Atithi means a guest whose date of arrival is not known, or a person who arrives unexpectedly. Atithi is made up of word A plus Tithi, in which A stands for not known and Tithi means date. Devo means God and Bhav stands for is. Atithi Devo Bhav hence means that the arrival of a guest at any time is like the arrival of God, and the guest shall be treated thus. This sentiment is deep-rooted in our culture even today. In recent times, the Government of India through Ministry of Tourism has used this slogan to promote tourism in India. Come to the part number 25.2.2, and you may read from the lines, so I have learned to after being bored. So I have learned many things, son. I have learned to wear many faces like dresses, home face, office face, street face, host face, cocktail face with all their conforming smiles like a fixed portrait smile. And I have learned too to laugh with only my teeth and shake hands without my heart. I have also learned to say goodbye when I meet good riddance, to say glad to meet you without being glad, and to say it's been nice talking to you after being bored. Have you ever said something, learners, something nice to someone without meaning it? Why do you think you said it? Was it because you were too busy and didn't think about what you were saying? Was it because it was the correct thing to say in the situation? To be a part of the society, we need to learn behavior that is accepted in society. We begin to learn this as we grow up and behave according to the situation we are in. We learn this behavior so well that our natural behavior slowly disappears, and in each different situation we behave in the way that is considered appropriate for that situation. The poet says that he behaves very differently in the office compared to the way he behaves at a party or on the street. And none of these different faces that he puts on his natural self or his real face. He says that he has also learned to say that he doesn't really mean, because they are the correct things to say in that situation. For example, when we are introduced to someone, we are taught to say, glad to meet you. So the poet says that he too sometimes politely greets a person in this way, even though he may not be interested in meeting them in any way. The poet feels sad that, like other adults in today's world, he has forgotten how to be a natural person. Learners, coming to the gist, in the first stanza at the start of the poem, Okara writes, they used to laugh with their hearts and eyes, but now they only laugh with their teeth, while their eyes block cold eyes surge behind my shadow. This phrase illustrates the change in the way people act, showing that their laughs used to be genuine and heartfelt. However, now their attitudes have changed. The description of laugh with their teeth illustrates someone showing false interest. The dark imagery, ice block cold eyes, which follows, shows that there is no emotion or feeling in the action. In the next stanza, Okara describes how they used to shake hands with their hearts, implying that the action were genuine and were also symbolic of good intentions. However, now they shake hands without hearts, while their left hands search my empty pockets. This phrase illustrates that all good intentions have gone, and how it is with every man, every man for him. Everybody is only focusing on their own personal gain. The use of metaphor emphasizes how there is a lack of trust, as everybody is trying to use each other. The phrase empty pockets could connote. In the next stanza, Okara shows the change in him as a man, and I have learned to say goodbye, and when I mean good riddance. Here, there is an evident shift in the stanza due to the fact that he is now talking about himself, and now he too has learned to be false. This could imply that the society has pressuring him into changing in a negative way. At the end of the poem, Okara confesses, I want to be what I used to be, showing instant regret and sadness at the choices he previously made. This piece of dialogue could suggest that he can only be himself around his son, as he recognizes his younger self in his son, the self that was genuine and true, which had not yet been beaten down by society. Learners, come to the Let Us Do section of 25.1 part. All of us need help at some point of time. Learners, try to reflect on the fact how you would feel if someone committed to help you and then refused. Learners, the last part of the stanza, stanza 6 and 7, but believe me when I was like you. So I have learned many things, son. I have learned to wear many faces, he says. The poet has a deep desire to go back to the innocence of childhood. He is dissatisfied with his own changed self. He thinks that his son's genuine laughter can teach him how to express his feelings honestly. He wants to relearn how to behave in a natural way. He wants to get rid of the falseness in his behavior that makes his laugh unpleasant. Because he laughs with his lips and teeth and not with his eyes and heart. Learners, imagine, I'm just giving you an exercise. Imagine you are the father in the poem. Try to think one or two actions of your childhood that made you realize how your conduct differs from your child and that made you admire him. Think one or two actions of your child that made you realize how your conduct differs from that of your child and that made you admire him. These actions of your child inspire you to be like him. Record these actions in the form of a diary entry. Let us write in lesson number 1. I hope you remember the lesson number 11's Let Us Write section, my elder brother's section. That was a lesson 18. Now, try to refer to that Let Us Write section in lesson number 11, my elder brother, and lesson number 18, the little girl. And you'll find this diary entry, how to write a diary. Coming to vocabulary building, cold eyes mean emotionless. Eye search means look for something. Indeed means something which does exist. Shut means closed. Conforming means normally acceptable. Portrait means picture. Good riddance means a feeling of relief when an unwanted person leaves. Muting means expressionless. not expressed in speech. Fangs mean poisonous teeth of snake. Follow. Learners, figures of speech, simile and metaphor. A figure of speech is a departure from the ordinary form of expression. It is employed to produce a greater effect. There are 4 different kinds of figures of speech. Number 1, those based on resemblance, for example, simile, metaphor, personification and apostrophe. Number 2, those based on contrast, for example, antithesis and epigram. Number 3, those based on association, for example, metonymy and synecdoche. Number 4, those depending on the construction of the plot, for example, climax and anticlimax. Simile. In a simile, we make a comparison between 2 objects of different kinds. These 2 objects will have at least one point in common. The righteous shall flourish as the palm tree. Here, a comparison is made between the righteous and the palm tree. Life is as tedious as a twice told tale. So, these were some examples of simile. Now, some very common examples of simile in everyday speech. As proud as a peacock, as cool as a cucumber, as hard as nails, as good as gold, as old as the hills, as clear as crystal. Try to note, learners, a comparison of 2 things of the same kind is not a simile. Coming to metaphor, a metaphor is an implied simile. It doesn't state that one thing is like another or acts like another. Instead, it says that the two things are one and the same. A simile, on the other hand, says that one thing is like another. Thus, when we say she is like an angel, we use a simile, but when we say she is an angel, we use a metaphor. Examples of metaphor: life is a dream. Example of a simile: life is like a dream. Example of a metaphor again: the camel is the ship of the desert. Coming to implied comparison, I would just give you a very small example of Shelley's Ode to the West Wind. That is a poem. Here Shelley says, I would read the first 2 stanzas of the poem. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. Yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes, O thou who charitest to their dark wintry bed. Addressing the west wind as a human over here, I'm just talking about implied comparison. Addressing the west wind as a human, the poet describes its activities. It describes dead leaves away as they were ghosts fleeing a wizard. The leaves are yellow, pale and black and red, as if they had died of an infectious disease. The west wind carries seed in its chariot and deposits them in the earth, where they lie until the spring wind awakens them by blowing on a trumpet, that is the clarion. When they form buds, the spring wind spreads them over plains and on hills. In a paradox, the poet addresses the west wind as a destroyer and a preserver, then asks it to listen to what he says. The poet says the west wind drives clouds along, just as it does dead leaves after it shakes the clouds free of the sky and the oceans. These clouds erupt with rain and lightning. Against the sky, the lightning appears as a bright shaft of hair from the head of a manet. The poet compares the west wind into a funeral song. Again, listen to what I am saying. The poet compares the west wind to funeral song sung at the death of a year, and says the night will become a dome erected over the year's tomb with all the wind's gathered might. From the dome will come black rain, fire and hail. Again, the poet asks the west wind to continue to listen to what he has to say. Learners, this is an example of implied comparison, and I hope you can look back to the poem to know what it is. and you must have got some understanding what implied comparison is by this very example. Coming to the satire, which is also there in the poem, satire, learners, is a technique employed by writers to expose and criticize foolishness and corruption of an individual or a society by using humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule. It intends to improve humanity by criticizing its follies and foibles. A writer in a satire uses fictional characters which stand for real people to expose and condemn their corruption. A writer may point a satire toward a person, a country, or even the entire world. Usually, a satire is a comical piece of writing which makes fun of an individual or a society to expose its stupidity and shortcomings. In addition, he hopes that those he criticizes will improve their characters by overcoming their weakness. Satire and irony are interlinked. Irony is the difference between what is said or done and what is actually meant. Therefore, writers frequently employ satire to point at the dishonesty and silliness of individuals and society and criticize them by ridiculing them. Sometimes, I'll just give you one example of satire in everyday life. Most political cartoons which we witness every day in newspapers and magazines are examples of satire. These cartoons criticize some recent actions of political figures in a comical way. Some shows on television are also examples of satire. These shows claim to target what they think are stupid, political, and social viewpoints. Function of satire. The role of satire is to ridicule or criticize these vices in the society, which the writer considers a threat to civilization. The writer considers it his obligation to expose these vices for the betterment of society or humanity. Therefore, the function of satire is not to make others laugh at persons or ideas they make fun of. It intends to warn the public and to change their opinions about prevailing corruption conditions in society. This poem is also a satire on modern day human beings, learners, which I have just taken up. Learners, when we use humor, irony, sarcasm, or exaggeration to criticize someone or something, it is called satire. The poem is a satire on modern society. With the help of examples from the poem, support this statement. I think you will be able to support this statement and try to do some exercise on your own. Read and understand the poem thoroughly before taking the test, learners. Equally important is the need to read and understand your questions well so that you can give relevant answers. Learners, remember, each lesson demands your undivided attention, as it is not only a lesson, it has its inbuilt language skills, English language skills, which you need to understand well enough to write your exams. Please look up the book of secondary level English of NIOS before writing your exams. Prepare well for your exams. Best of luck and thanks.